Well, what is the strangest season of Stranger Things? If you're familiar with the show, it might not be much of a surprise of which season we're going to discuss today. We're talking about Season 3 of Stranger Things, and I think it's the strangest season for a lot of reasons. I don't think it's the worst season. If you want to find out what season I think that is, go watch my video about Season 5. But Season 3 just stands out for a lot of reasons we're going to discuss today. Again, I don't hate it, but I also don't love it. Let's talk about the good things from this season. What really stands out to me is the character placements. The character placements and the direction of the characters. For example, Steve is put in the mall and he works at the ice cream shop, he meets Robin, but putting Steve in the mall I think works really well. It shows the direction he's going in his life and his career. He makes the comment that him and his dad aren't on good terms, that's why he's having to work here. He makes comments throughout the season about seeing other high school girls and why are they dating that dude, he didn't start on the basketball team. And so working at the mall really humbles Steve and opens his eyes to the real world outside of high school, outside of what matters when you're in high school. It also humbles him in the way that people treat him there, and so it's a really good placement for Steve, for him to work there to further humble his character. He grew up wealthier, he grew up popular, and now he's not wealthy, he's not really popular, the high school popularity has worn off, and he's working at a mall scooping ice cream. And he's also friends with junior high kids. It really humbles his character, and putting him in the mall also puts him near the Russian plotline and the final fight with the Mind Flayer. So just putting him in the mall I think really works great for his character and the direction he's going this season. Nancy and Jonathan might be the best duo in Season 3. And what I mean by that is that if you look back at Nancy and Jonathan's characters in Season 1, I think Season 3 is a natural progression of where their characters started in Season 1. We see Nancy being the same type of character she was in Season 1, that she's very curious, she's very determined, she wants to get stuff done. And we see some of Jonathan's natural traits coming out in Season 3, acting in the same sense that he would in Season 1. He's cautious, he kind of avoids confrontation. It takes a lot in the earlier seasons to get under Jonathan's skin, just like in Season 3. The drama and tension between Nancy and Jonathan is fantastic. They have a natural dilemma where Nancy thinks they should go against the grain, ignore their bosses, and go find a great interesting story to write, to put in the paper, to get their name out there. Jonathan says, that sounds great, but if you continue to poke the bear, you're going to get us fired. You're going to get us into a lot of trouble. So the dilemma is just fantastic because you can relate to it. You can understand Nancy wanting to progress her career and wanting to further that and go outside of her job description to do that, especially given how the men at work are treating her since she's a woman. And you see that as the viewer in real time. Jonathan doesn't understand as much because he's a guy, he hasn't experienced that, and he just sees it as we're going to climb the corporate ladder, just be patient. And Nancy's trying to show him, well, it's not a guarantee for me. We're both in different situations. And so overall, I just thought their interactions, their dialogue, their arguments, their decisions really fit their characters. They were very interesting and it added a lot to the story. I thought Eleven and Mike's relationship this season was engaging, and it was cool to see both of them get older and get into this relationship, but see the struggles of it. Mike having to lie because of Hopper and the tension it created between him and Eleven was great. And then Eleven finally learns to really be interested in her own things, and she starts to become more of her own person even more. And so she eventually breaks up with Mike. At the very end of the season, if you remember, Mike wouldn't say I love you directly to Eleven, and she tells him before she leaves. Their dynamic this season was very enjoyable, and I liked the progression of that. We mentioned a moment ago about Steve and Robin's relationship and how they grow to be friends. Originally, when you watch Season 3, the writers are intentionally misleading you and making you think that Robin and Steve are going to end up together. And then eventually you get the bathroom scene where Steve realizes that she is a fun person to be around. He really enjoys being around her and she means a lot to him. But then she kind of shuts him down and says, that's not going to work. And it's just a nice scene between them two, showing Steve's growth as a character. He's making relationships with people that he would have ignored in high school and he wouldn't have gotten along with, and he thought were maybe weird and they couldn't be friends. And so it just really shows more of Steve's growth as a person, and he's just been humbled so much. And now we're seeing Now we're seeing some great effects of all this humbling. Seeing that development over the seasons has been fantastic. There's kind of a multi-season climax in the scene of him and Robin, showing that he's learned to appreciate anybody and be friends with anyone, whereas in season 1 that wasn't the case. Will's frustration that keeps growing from how busy his friends are and how Mike and Levin just want to run off together since they're in a relationship, and kind of the same with Lucas and Max, and nobody wants to play D&D, nobody wants to be kids anymore. And while some of it might be a little corny and Will's not my favorite character, I did actually like that episode on the rewatch. I think it's a very relatable thing. You know, it can be really hard when you have friends that start to date and start to meet other people and hang out, and they get busy with college and work, and you just don't see them anymore, and it can be very frustrating and just depressing. And I really could feel for Will in that moment. He in a sense lost time in the Upside Down. He was tormented a lot in season 2 from the Mind Flayer, and now all of his buddies have girlfriends and they're not really wanting to play D&D. They're not wanting to hang out anymore. Even his own brother's working all the time now. He has a girlfriend. I think anybody can relate to the frustration and even just sadness of seeing friends go off to college, get other jobs, they get married, they date somebody, and life just gets busy. You just can't spend that time with people anymore. It's just not like it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I think most people can relate to that sentiment that is expressed in that episode with Will. The one downside to this is that this is kind of the only thing Will does this season. Right now, we're still praising season 3. We'll get to the critiques later. Murray and Alexi's relationship is pretty cool. It's very short-lived. They have a quick little friendship, and it's just funny all the way around. They get along, they laugh, they get to know each other a little bit, not as much as I would have liked. And then Alexi's death is very sad, and Murray feels responsible for it. And originally Murray wanted to stay out of things, but through helping Hopper and Joyce and his friendship with Alexi, he gets not only pulled in physically, but emotionally pulled in by the weight of what's going on in Hawkins, and that climaxes in Alexi's death. As we continue to look at some of the characters in Season 3, Dacre Montgomery, which is Billy's actor, is fantastic. He's very dynamic in his acting. You see him trying to really seduce Mrs. Wheeler. Then you see him by the poolside after the Mind Flayer has infected him, and he looks uncomfortable, he looks overheated, he's spacing out, he's not really present. He's very violent at times. He also gives such tense scenes like at Heather's house and how menacing he can be. And one scene that just really drove home how dynamic his acting was for me is when they're in the sauna room. I think it's episode 4 of season 3. The group hunts down Billy. They put him in the sauna to cook him up to see if he's infected by the Mind Flayer. He starts off by being mad, but eventually he sits down and starts crying. And Max looks over into the sauna and sees Billy just down there crying. And it's all a ruse to just bust out further. But the acting of this guy is just phenomenal. The acting in season 3 across the board is solid. I mean, there's a lot of characters that aren't written the best, but the acting makes them very likable, I think. But overall, I just thought that Billy's actor did a phenomenal job this season, and I was very impressed by all of his scenes and how dynamic he was. The world building is just excellent this season. It's excellent in one area. There's nothing else they really do besides add the mall, but them adding the mall was handled so well that I can't help but be impressed and enjoy that. What I really enjoyed about it is that the mall becomes a staple of season 3. So when you see mall scenes or when people reference the mall, you know they're talking about season 3, and that's pretty cool. I like that. One of my favorite things about the mall, though, that really stood out to me on the rewatch is that the mall is connected to so many plot lines. It just makes the characters and their world very believable and realistic, and feels like there's natural consequences and ripple effects when something gets introduced to the world, just like in real life. You know, the mall affects the economy. These other businesses are shutting down, and Nancy originally wants to write a story about how the mall is affecting these mom and pop shops. You see politics coming into play. The mayor's for the mall, the small business owners are not for the mall. Because of the mall, Steve gets a job, and then he meets Robin, and then he's further connected to the Russian plot line, which works really well. Given the nature of the mall, it makes sense that these teenage characters would all go there to hang out, to shop around, and it just felt very natural. It's also just great to have a location to have your final fight at, or your final big climax. Kind of a glimpse into some other topics I want to do one day, but one of my favorite things in One Piece, the manga by Ichiro Oda, a lot of the best arcs climax in a very notable and significant location in the world. If you're familiar with One Piece, you'll see this in Enies Lobby, Marineford, Dressrosa. These final fights climax at a major place. And the same thing happens with the mall in Season 3. It affects really every character, it affects the politics, the economy, and everything, and you get the final battle there. And not to mention the Russians are hiding underneath it too. So it just connects everything very well. And I like how a season can be known as the mall season, or in The Walking Dead, you have the prison seasons. A location can really define a part of the story. The filming is very creative this season. For pretty much every season past Season 1 of Stranger Things, the budget grows and grows. So naturally, other things get better, like the cinematography. And I was just impressed by the cinematography this season. I think it's visually very strong and ambitious at times. I'm a videographer, so I just always appreciate when shows take the time to really plan out a specific cut or a specific transition and really do it in a fun, cool way. One specific transition that stood out to me, I think it's a security camera lens. The screen pans into the lens of the security camera, so then you just have the lens on screen, and then it zooms out, and it's the binoculars of Dustin and Steve looking around the mall looking for evil Russians. And so that was one of the transitions that stood out. There's plenty more. I just really appreciated the cinematography of this season, and the budget overall is really great. We'll go through just a couple scenes that I enjoyed in the season. You know, every note I took about Season 3 isn't going to make it into this video, and not everything fits under a perfect section in the video, so we're just going to title this Scenes That I Enjoyed, and we'll just go through scenes that I enjoyed and why I did. When Eleven and Max get to Heather's house, I thought that was a very tense and unsettling scene. They immediately see Billy talking to Heather's parents. Them and the audience are thinking, okay, where's Heather? You know, we saw Heather get abducted. We saw Billy hurting her. Where's Heather? It's a very tense scene, but then the twist comes that Heather's actually right there, and she walks around with a plate of cookies, and you and Eleven and Max are sitting there thinking, what is going on here? Eleven has always seen real life. It's been verified she sees real events. And we saw Heather get abducted and freaking out, rightly so. But now she's standing there next to Billy, next to her parents, like everything's fine. And so your mind starts to wonder, did he threaten her? How could he threaten her to the point of her acting this normal? Even if he convinced her to come back to her own house and put on this charade for her parents, how is she this calm? And so your brain's just trying to process what's going on, why is Heather here, what does Billy want? And it's just a very tense, interesting scene. I was very impressed by it. I really enjoyed when Nancy and Jonathan were confronted by their boss on all that they'd been doing. They find Miss Driscoll, you know, she has to go to the hospital, and so their boss, Tom, catches wind of this. They go in the office and they get chewed out. Jonathan told Nancy what might happen is that they might get fired for all the stuff she keeps doing, and it ended up happening. But it's not just that simple. As we know, Tom has been infected by the Mind Flayer, and in the scene, he begins to lose his cool as he goes through this list of things, all the mistakes that Jonathan and Nancy made, and all the blunders they made. And he climaxes it with, oh, and by the way, Miss Driscoll is a paranoid schizophrenic. And it's like, oh, wow. Even you as the viewer, you're like, oh, man, okay. Now Jonathan and Nancy they don't have anything to stand on. They have no evidence. And their lead witness is a paranoid schizophrenic. Now they look really silly, right? But on top of that, if you go back and watch that scene, right whenever Tom explodes, he kicks his chair and the camera tilts a little bit. The cameras are tilted in like every shot for the remainder of that scene. And that really shows Tom's mental state and how uneven it is, how unreasonable he's being right now. I like that scene a lot. It makes that scene stand out much more than it would have without the creative camera work. Hopper and Joyce interrogating the mayor is a fun scene. Now, I have plenty of gripes we're about to get to about Hopper and Joyce this season, especially Hopper, but I like the scene of them interrogating the mayor. Remember earlier in the season, he goes in there and the mayor's calling the shots, he's smoking a cigar, and he's telling Hopper, like, this is how it's going to go down, man. Just do your job as the little town sheriff. And now the script is flipped. Hopper's threatening him with his affair, he's threatening him with all these other things that he's done, and then the mayor starts to threaten Hopper back, and then eventually Hopper just assaults the guy and then threatens to cut his finger off. The secretary grabs the phone and then Joyce pulls the phone out of the wall and says, who are you going to call? The police? And I just love that line. You know, the sheriff is in there beating up the mayor. You see Hopper's threatening to cut off the mayor's finger with the cigar cutter, which I just thought was great, given that in the scene that the mayor's talking down to Hopper, he's cutting a cigar, lighting it, acting like everything's great, and he's got everything under control, and then Hopper uses that same thing to threaten him. I just enjoyed that a lot. I also enjoy that scene because it shows Hopper's determination, like he had in season 1, to get stuff done and to go against the grain, even if it meant getting in big trouble from assaulting the mayor. He was willing to do that to find out the truth. I like Billy's backstory. Some of this stuff was alluded to in season 2 with the interactions with his dad. It gives a lot of depth to his character and makes him a lot more sympathetic, which is very important given the villainous role he plays throughout the whole season. He's just a pawn of the Mind Flayer. He's not really choosing to do all this stuff. He's being forced to. So I thought it was great that the writers had us sympathize with Billy instead of just vilifying him the entire time. Hopper reuniting with Eleven in Starcourt Mall at the beginning of the finale is fantastic. It's great to see their relationship. One of the saddest scenes in probably the entire show, in my opinion, is at the end of season 3. You think Hopper's dead, and so when Eleven reads his letter, it's just very emotional. It's sad, and then the song Heroes plays at the end. At the end of the day, my favorite stories boil down to characters and the decisions they make and how they grow. Moving on to the negative aspects of season 3, the main critiques that I have. Man, where did the mystery go? You know, I thought this show was about government cover-ups, monsters from a different realm, disappearing children, and we have all these questions and we're looking for these answers just as the main cast looks for these answers, but not in season 3. The main cast is looking for answers, but you as the viewer are not, because the writers chose to show you everything. The opening scene just shows Russians using this giant machine to pretty obviously make a portal. And while they're not in America yet, it establishes that the Russians are going to be a threat this season, which in and of itself isn't bad, but when you write the script around the characters finding the Russian base and finding out what's causing the electrical outages, when you put that as the mystery, it hurts the payoff because us as the audience already know the Russians are involved. No, we haven't seen them directly in Hawkins, but it doesn't take much to infer that they're there, whereas the main characters have really no indication that Russians are there until season 3 starts. So it just hurts the long-term mystery of the season as the viewer. Again, the characters don't know what's going on and they get the enjoyment of putting the clues together and figuring it out, but you as the viewer, you don't get to enjoy that because you already see the Russians. This also happens with the Mind Flayer. You see the dust swirling in that abandoned mill. You see the rats being exploded and formed into this monster. Mid-season, it's fully revealed to be the Mind Flayer. And while that keeps the eldritch horror tone, it hurts the mystery because, again, they're showing you things they didn't show the main cast. Now, they did this in season 1, but it worked better because in season 1, you literally don't know anything that's happening. Whereas in season 3, it doesn't take much to put together, oh, the Russians are going to be the main villains this season in place of Hawkins' lab, and the Mind Flayer's back. It doesn't take long to figure that out as the viewer, where the characters get to enjoy this mystery and asking all these questions and putting all these clues together. Well, you already know the Russians are back, and you already know the Mind Flayer's back. The location of the Russian base is hidden from the audience, but again, it doesn't take long before it becomes obvious where it's at. But what's worse is that the Mind Flayer's not hidden at all. You know exactly what's happening to Billy. You know exactly what's in his head, what's making him act this weird. You even know the exact monster it is. This isn't a new monster from the Upside Down. It's just the Mind Flayer in a different form doing different things this season. I think the reason they show the audience so much of the Mind Flayer is because they still need the show to feel like Stranger Things. It still needs to have that tone of eldritch horror, and really, without Billy's scenes, the first 4 episodes have like no eldritch horror at all. It's just like an 80s coming-of-age teen drama. They show you the eldritch horror, so you, as the viewer, go, oh yeah, this is Stranger Things. There's monsters and there's a different realm. But in reality, outside of Billy, there's no other indication of eldritch horror at all. And so it seems that they kind of reveal the monster early on. They reveal so much information to you as the viewer to keep that tone that this is still Stranger Things. On top of that, it's less of an eldritch horror in the fact that now the Mind Flayer is a physical monster. He's not the monster that's made out of a tornado that you can't really touch and that somehow is connected to our world, but they don't really know. No, he's just a physical bag of bones now. I really don't like that aspect of it. Just like in my season 5 critique, it makes the story focus more on blockbuster cinema, explosion, big final conflict, instead of being this eerie small town horror mystery. Instead of it being that, now we're going a whole other direction. The writers show you a lot of things they don't show the audience, so there's not much mystery in this season really at all. But on top of that, it's comedy central. The tone of season 1 has completely left the building. It's just been jettisoned out of the aircraft, because now this whole season is just really chock full of comedy. And now look, all the comedy's not bad. I laugh at some of the stuff. I know some people don't like Murray as a character. I think Murray's pretty funny. I don't mind him. Hopper makes me laugh a good bit this season. A lot of the cast does. But while those characters and those scenes are funny, it doesn't change the fact that it's a vast departure from season 1 and the original tone set in season 1. And you can really see how much the tone changed in just a few scenes. One of the very first scenes of season 3 establishes this is going to be a wackier, funnier season. Whenever it opens up in this Russian lab, they're trying to make this portal and it's not working, they keep failing, and so the general threatens the lead scientist. And then the big bad Russian assassin, bodyguard, whatever you want to call him, he chokes this man out like it's WWE Monday Night Raw. He just picks him up with one shoulder, fully extended arm, doesn't even lean back at all, and just chokes this guy. Now you might be saying, look now, you're being too picky. This is a TV show, it's not real life. Just enjoy the ride, enjoy the show, it's a fun show. Don't think about it too much. Well, I've got some problems with that. Some stories do establish very early on that this story will be a bit otherworldly and unrealistic to our normal world today. But the problem I have with this is that Stranger Things set a specific tone in season 1 and followed up the tone fairly well in season 2 of, again, a realistic small town horror thriller mystery. But yeah, I just think the Russian choking that scientist out was very jarring. And another problem I have isn't just a little bit of added comedy, but so much screen time and dialogue is dedicated to comedy. There's even a scene where Alexei's telling Hopper, we can't break into that Russian base. It's the most highly secure base. It has maximum security. The most elite and lethal guards and soldiers from Russia are there. It's impossible to break in. It's laughable you would even consider breaking into that base. And then we cut over to a bunch of junior high kids crawling around in the air ducts, getting around just fine. And, spoiler alert, they'll end up leaving perfectly fine too. They don't suffer really any consequences. Even the people that were getting tortured in the other room get out rather unscathed. We'll get to some of those other things later, but the main point I'm making here is they wrote that dialogue between Alexei and Hopper to make the joke that it's this really impenetrable fortress, but then Dustin and Erica are just crawling around in there and no one's the wiser. And this goes into like the torture scenes with Steve and Robin. The torture scene is just laughable. There's some funny moments in it, but it's laughable in the fact that you can't take it seriously. And somebody says, well, they're not trying to take it seriously. Well, maybe I just imagined season 1 when Hopper got interrogated and there was nothing funny about that. Hawkins' lab was about to kill that man. It was very serious and the stakes were set. Now you have a foreign government who has no reason to care about America's citizens, and yet the tone is a comedy, but in season 1, the tone of Hopper's is very serious, and you really don't know what's going to happen to Hopper. Another reason the interrogation scene is frustrating and laughable is that in real life, we all know the Russian government in the 80s would have tortured Steve way worse to get information, and they would have tortured Robin as well, and they also wouldn't have escaped, at least not in the very convenient way they did. I mean, you can't even really call it torture, right? Like, they don't even really do anything to them and get out completely unscathed. And again, somebody might say, well, I mean, this is supposed to be a family-friendly show and it ain't gonna be that serious all the time. People don't have to die all the time. But if you remember the tone set in season 1, it was completely different. There were consequences when people made mistakes. There's consequences when you do reckless stuff, and Steve and Robin and Dustin and Erica rushing down into the Russian base, even though they didn't know it was there, but rushing down there, and then there being no real consequence for that because they all end up getting out alive. No one's really severely injured or really injured at all. There's no consequences for that. So then it starts to tell you as the viewer, oh, the main characters are safe no matter what. Steve's torture scene is the one scene I would go to tell somebody, yeah, this is a prime example of why this season is odd. While it should be intense and uncomfortable and unsettling, it's just a comedy. It's just written for laughs. Season 3 is funny, and I laughed at a lot of the jokes, but it also hurts the overall tone of the entire season, and it's a vast departure from season 1. You know, some characters just fell off. The most obvious character is Jim Hopper. Man, I love Hopper as a character. I still liked Hopper years ago when I watched season 3. On the rewatch, Hopper's really annoying. At the end of the day, he does sacrifice himself, so it kind of redeems how annoying he had been the whole season. But it doesn't change the fact that season 1 Hopper acted completely differently than this version of Hopper. He's very aggressive.
I know, I don't know, okay? Open the door!
He's childish.
You're crazy!
Crazy? You want to see real crazy?
He's whiny.
Joyce, drive!
I'm
Joyce,
trying.
please! Joyce! Drive!
It's also, again, just inconsistent with his original character. His original character didn't act like that. He was always confrontational and stubborn in season 1, but he wasn't obnoxious and whiny and this loud at all. He's like a whole different guy. He's also just less competent than he was in the earlier seasons. He comes across as though he's freaking out about every single problem they come across. He's complaining a lot, whining a lot, and just arguing and yelling at Joyce instead of taking the time to really think through a problem. He was a character at one time you would look up to as a determined, witty, good man, but now he comes across as a man-child that can't figure out how to solve any problem. And I just hate it because Hopper's a great character, and he's pretty great the rest of the show. He's awesome in season 4 and in seasons 1 and 2, but season 3 and even in season 5, he's just different. Joyce as a character is just really annoying this season. Her and Hopper are whining at each other the whole time, but on top of that, Joyce is just freaking out about magnets falling. And you might not agree with me on this point, and that's fine, but the magnet thing just annoyed me. It bothered me so much that she saw one abnormal thing and she assumes that the evil military's back and they're doing something crazy, and she goes to the science teacher and they start doing this experiment, and then she's asking questions, and the science teacher tells her that somebody would need a ton of energy to produce anything that would knock these magnets off. And given the stuff she'd seen in the past, she's like, oh yeah, I know how this is going to go. It's the evil government again. While all that is understandable to a degree, I just think it's a stretch. I think it's a stretch that she would see some magnets fall at her house and at her work, and she would immediately think the evil government's back. Now, you can have a paranoid character, because she was a paranoid character in season 1. That's fine. She comes across a bit too crazy, in my opinion, because she has that one thing to go off of. That is the magnets. Will's fine, Will's safe, just magnets fell off the fridge, and she's losing her mind about it. The writers could have solved this problem by just having one throwaway line in season 2 when they're more buddy-buddy with the Hawkins Lab scientists, and they make the comment that, yeah, we tried to open portals, but it would blow the electricity for the town. On top of that, it would mess up with the magnetic fields. You could have a throwaway line of dialogue like that, and Joyce remember it and come across as a very intelligent, witty character, and she's like, no, I know why this is happening. Either the government's doing this, or another government or another group is doing a similar thing to make a portal. But the reason they didn't do all that is because they didn't think ahead to season 3. That's why. They didn't know about the magnet thing when they were writing season 1 and 2. They didn't know about the Russians under the mall. They probably didn't even know about the mall in season 2. And that's become really evident with how bad season 5 was handled. But instead of having one line of dialogue to give Joyce more of a reason to be this worried, she's just worried about magnets. And it just comes across as irrationally paranoid and plot convenient that this one odd thing that happened leads them straight to the main villains. So that's pretty convenient as well. In the earlier seasons, Joyce is a fairly competent character. In this season, I don't think she's competent at all. I think she gets extremely lucky with the whole magnet thing. There wasn't really much that she put together there. She just ran with one thing and it turned out to be true. The scene where Hopper and her find Alexei and that other mechanic, and then the Russian assassin shows up and Hopper jumps him, but the guns get thrown on the ground and they're fist fighting, and Joyce has the gun. She picks up the gun, and so she aims it at the Russian. No. Oh, she runs up and puts it to the back of his head. No. What does she do? She tosses the gun to Hopper and tosses it way too far, and it goes behind Hopper, and the Russian gets it, and he has to dive out of the way. Like, what are you doing? You had one bad throw of that gun, and you just got us all killed, when you could have just shot the guy, or at least held the gun up and told him to stop hitting Hopper. You could have done something else besides throwing the gun way above Hopper's head where he couldn't get it. She had that gun around her for like 10 seconds. If you go back and watch the scene, from the second the gun lands next to her, it shows Hopper and that guy fight for like 10 seconds. And what's she doing in those 10 seconds? I don't know. But when it cuts back to her, she's throwing the gun at Hopper over his head. So just completely useless in these very intense, important situations. And she didn't come across that way in the earlier seasons.
Oh, no.
11 and Mike have a good story this season, like I mentioned. My only critique with 11, and they do kind of fix it in the end, but 11 is used as plot armor through this entire season. Like, anytime the Mind Flayer shows up, 11 shows up. Anytime they gotta fight the monsters, 11's there. At the end, she doesn't have her powers, so she can't, but they time it perfectly where they close the portal so the Mind Flayer doesn't work anymore, apparently. Yeah, 11's character just comes across as plot armor. Again, they did fix it by the climax of the story, but leading up to the climax, she saves the main group from like every single dire situation constantly, and it gets a bit old. Yeah, I just hate that her character has so much plot armor and that the whole group relies on her so heavily. It would be cool if more people were dying. 11 would have all this pressure on herself, like, I've got to save everybody. I'm the only one with the power. The Mind Flayer's coming after me, so I'm the reason my friends are getting killed. Could have been a great storyline for her, but since nobody's dying, she's just plot armor and just saves everybody constantly. And I just kind of get sick of that. Some of my biggest gripes with Season 3 is that so many convenient things happen. It really gets out of hand at how convenient it is. We'll just go through a list of convenient things. Conveniently, Dustin intercepts a Russian code, and he knows it's Russian, and he concludes that it's evil Russians there in Hawkins sending a evil message. Like, okay, convenient that Dustin came to those conclusions completely by himself. 11 conveniently finds Billy. When 11 and Max are playing Spin the Bottle and that could land on 10 different people, it lands on Billy, and then she sees Billy abducting Heather, and then they know something's up with Billy. Remember, 11 only starts to follow Billy because of a game of Spin the Bottle. A random game of Spin the Bottle. Just randomly. Robin conveniently states that she understands multiple languages and recognizes the Russian alphabet, so then she begins to break down the code for him. Not that egregious, but it's still something I noticed. Here's where it gets worse though. Conveniently, there's a guy that speaks fluent Russian just down the road named Murray, and conveniently, the main villains this season, they're not from Japan or South America. They're from Russia. Very convenient. But conveniently, there's a guy that speaks Russian right down the road. And conveniently, the Russian base is right under the mall. And conveniently, they have to infiltrate said base. And there's only one hallway, so they have to run into Russian guards to interact. And so conveniently, Murray is there and agrees to go to help talk to all the Russian guards. Also conveniently, he tricks everyone he comes across. If this was season 1, a lot of these scenes would be intense, difficult to overcome, and just dangerous, but in this season that's not the case. Think about how Steve and Robin get out of the Russian base. Do you remember? Do you remember how they get out of the room and got to the hallway with Erica and Dustin? Well, it's not shown. You just see Dustin tase one guy, and the next time we see them, they're just driving a golf cart down a hallway. And they run into no guards. No cameras see them, no guards see them between the torture room and the hallway, no guards stop them on the way back. They get to the elevator, no guards are there. And so these junior high kids just break out 2 drugged prisoners from an underground secret Russian base. And they run into no guards and no security cameras. That's pretty, that's realistic. Like Alexi said, maximum security. And shows that the show now has really no consequences by Steve and Robin escaping. They sneak out of the base, they escape the cells, they avoid all the detection, they don't run into a single guard, and so there's no consequences for their major blunder of accidentally infiltrating a Russian base. And it also just completely destroys the believability. In season 1, when I saw Hawkins' lab and I saw the people that worked there with Dr. Brenner, I was scared for the group. I thought they're going to get 11. They're going to take one of the boys. They're going to kill Hopper. What's going to happen? When you see the Russians after Robin and Steve escape, you go, well, these are dumb Russians. So everything's going to work out great. And that's just what kills me, is how threatening and unsettling the government was in season 1. But in season 3, the Russians come across as completely incompetent. They have no security, and they're being infiltrated by literal children. It feels like the writers turned the difficulty down to easy, and that really everything's been easy. Hopper can run around and whine, little kids can break into Russian bases, and somehow we're all going to end up together and we're going to beat the big bad Russians and Mind Flayer. Somehow. And some of these points tie together. We'll just kind of extend into this next point. I just alluded to it. The antagonists are just idiotic this season. Both the Russians and the Mind Flayer, I just cannot understand. The Russians are more obviously dumb. The Mind Flayer also does things that doesn't really make sense. The Russians feel like cartoonish villains. Like, why were they transmitting out a coded message anyway? And you might say, oh, well, they were trying to transmit to their comrades so that they would know where to go. What do you mean? Be like, we're just in the mall in this small town in Indiana. We're under the mall. Tell them when you're back in Russia, we have a base under the mall. Just come to the docking area at 10 p.m. and we'll let you in. Or just meet them at a gas station down the road, and that'd be the place you meet, and then just bring them to the mall every time. Why do you need a constant Russian code? And on top of this I could not understand this for the life of me. Why is it that the Russian code has something to do with the scenery in the food court, the scenery in the mall? And what's worse is, why was the original audio recorded where that kids ride is going in the background? Did a Russian really come out in the middle of the mall and start to talk about the yellow and blue handles on the clock and the Chinese restaurant, and he's just sitting there speaking fluent Russian into a microphone in the middle of the mall? I mean, is that really the best plan? And is that even believable that would happen? Like in what world do you record a coded message in the middle of a mall? Why would you even do it there? Right? Steve comes across very intelligent. The fact that he realizes that Kids Ride is in the background of the Russian message they've listened to over and over again. So Steve comes across smart, but why would the Russian record it there in the first place? And why even really transmit it? What are you really saying in it, right? Why does that matter? Whenever Joyce and Hopper break into Hawkins' lab, because Joyce is worried about Hawkins' lab again, the Russian assassin's there for unknown reasons, and he ambushes Hopper and has the perfect opportunity after he knocks Hopper out to just shoot him and kill him, but he doesn't do it. And somebody might say, well, if they shoot and kill him, that's going to put people on the alert, and they're going to go look, and they're going to hunt down the killer. You really think they're going to kill the sheriff, that one guy could die, or him and Joyce, and anybody is really going to dig into that and figure out what's going on? Nobody in that town's going to figure it out for sure. Another option you have, you just take Hopper captive after you knock him out, or you fake his death or something. I don't know. It's just crazy to me that the Russian didn't kill him. What's more of a problem? A dead guy that died from a random gunshot, or leaving the lead sheriff alive that you just fist fought with, that's going to hunt you down and actually kill you later in the story, right? And also it makes less sense that he wouldn't shoot Hopper isolated in the lab with no one around, but at the carnival he's just walking around shooting Alexi in the chest and running around on the kids' rides just emptying the magazine at Hopper. He's comfortable shooting people there, but at the Hawkins lab late at night, nobody's around, there's no witnesses. I don't know if I'll shoot this guy now. I just can't. It just boggles my mind. The Mind Flayer strategy doesn't make sense. I get the point was to dissolve all the people to make the Mind Flayer's physical body bigger so it could go fight 11, and if it kills 11, then it kind of wins. Well, there's a couple problems I have with this. Number one, why not just continue infecting the whole town so that you have more bodies across the whole town? Somebody might say, well, because if the group closes the portal, then the Mind Flayer's cut off, so it doesn't matter how big of an area he takes over. Okay, well, the Mind Flayer should know where the portal's at. Why not infiltrate the Russian base? It should be pretty easy. Erica and Dustin could do it. Why not infiltrate the Russian base and infect all the Russians and then secure the fact that the portal would be open if you just take over the whole base? Why dissolve your 50 people you've been collecting to lose to a bunch of fireworks, again, from children? The Mind Flayer is just not nearly as threatening when its whole plan was make a big monster and fight 11. When you can infect people and manipulate people and, control people. The Mind Flayer definitely should have infected the Russians and infiltrated their base and took it over to make sure that the portal doesn't get closed. But instead, it was not near the portal at all, and right before it could kill 11, the portal closed. So, Mind Flayer really didn't think that one through. Some characters feel like they're more figures than actual people with unique personalities. One of the most obvious example to me is Alexei. I like Alexei. I think his death is sad. I think he has some funny scenes with Hopper and Murray. But Alexei feels like a fake person. Like, this is a real scientist from Russia in the context of the story, right? And he's just spilling the beans on how everything works for some Slurpees. He's buddy-buddy with the Americans now. But to top it all off, he acts like a 4-year-old at the carnival. Again, I like him as a character, but we don't know anything about him. He didn't really show any real concern to get back home. He never mentions his family or anything that would naturally tie someone back home. He never really mentions anything outside of Slurpees and science. That's all he really talks about. And so he just feels like this guy made for the story. It comes across as unrealistic and unrelatable. Because if anybody else was in that situation, they'd have been talking about getting home or getting to their family, or they'd have elaborated more why they want to get away from the Russians and why he's fine betraying his own country. None of that really gets covered. He just acts like a kid in a candy shop, literally. I mentioned this earlier with just how jarring the comedy was. The immersion gets broken throughout season 3 for me. And what I mean is that I go from, okay, this is serious, the Mind Flayer's doing some nasty stuff, the Russians are going to take over Hawkins or open the portal to the Upside Down, what's going to happen, to, oh, here's a Coke placement, go get some new Coke. Or, oh, here's some Eggos, go get some new Eggos. And so you have these product placements that feel very forced, and while they were there in the 80s, and I get why they do it, the scenes they come up in just feel like product placements, and they don't feel natural at all. The season's just leaning so much into the 80s tone, not the eldritch horror, small town mystery tone that it originally had. But the product placements really break the immersion and remind me that I'm watching a TV show and that big companies want me to buy their products. And so it really takes me out of the story when I see those things. I also hated how they always use the term evil Russians. They would say evil Russians, even before they verified there was Russians there, and way before they verified they were evil, they'd say evil Russians. And on one hand, it's kind of funny, it's very like 80s American movies, but again, Stranger Things Season 1 was written very well, and the characters feel real, and they talk in real ways, so the fact they said evil Russians constantly throughout the season was just very jarring to me. I don't think multiple characters would talk that way, in such a generic, odd way. The last immersion breaker that just killed me, and so many things wrong with the scene, is when Dustin and Susie Poo were singing to each other while Hopper and Joyce are in a Russian base trying to get the code to break in, could get killed at any moment. Dustin and Susie Poo are singing a song over the radio to get to the number for Planck's constant. Man, you can't convince me Hopper wouldn't have freaked out over that radio and been like, shut up with your singing and tell me that code before we die. He listens to the whole song, and then finally she tells the code, and it's a big victory. The code works, they get the stuff out, and everybody's happy. But man, I can't stand that scene for a couple reasons. The situation doesn't look that dire at all that we can have a whole sing-along. Hopper doesn't say anything, and on top of this, it eats up valuable screen time of the show itself. Like, why am I watching this sing-along right now in the climax of the season, right? Like what is happening? The stakes are high, they're infiltrating the Russian base, the Mind Flayer's hunting down 11, and we're singing songs? Just Susie Poo and Dusty Bun just singing? I mean, come on now. Who approved that in the script? That was just egregious. I like the fact that it was revealed Dustin had a girlfriend the whole time and nobody believed him, and they intentionally hid that from the audience. I like that, but man, the fact that her intro is her singing like that is just ridiculous scene. This affects multiple things. It's not just an immersion breaker, but it hurts your view of Hopper, and he doesn't react in a certain way that you think he would react. It also hurts the tone of the story, because the tone is like, this is a serious show. People die in this show. It's a serious show. We're singing a song. Like, what? So I can't stand that scene. But in conclusion, Season 3 is just a strange season. There's funny moments I like. There's individual character interactions that I like. I think the cinematography is great. I think the world building is fantastic with the addition of the mall, but it leans way too hard into comedy. There's nothing really to be revealed to the audience because they've shown them everything, and the characters rely extremely on convenience and on the fact that there are no consequences for their egregious actions throughout the season. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If it wasn't for Season 5, Season 3 would probably be my least favorite season, but Season 5 takes the cake on that one. In my opinion, Season 3 isn't the worst season, but it surely is the strangest season of Stranger Things.